Hi, my name is Rowan. They told me to leave. Not after a fight, not over money, but right after my mother's funeral. My brother called me a thief. My father said I was a mistake. They packed up my life, erased my name from the family trust, and left me standing alone outside a $5 million mansion, with nothing but a blue pen she once gave me. But 5 months later, I stepped off a private jet beside the President of the United States, and the donation everyone was waiting for, it had my name on it. Want to know what made them drop to their knees? Then let me show you the truth they buried, and the mother who made sure it would never fade. The air outside the church was sharp enough to sting my throat. February in Lakewood always felt like punishment. Gray skies pressing down, sleet biting at the edges of my coat. The world had turned the color of metal, and so had my heart. The priest's voice echoed through the cold air, brittle and too clean. Eleanor Hale loved her family more than anything. I almost laughed when he said it. My mother, the only person who ever looked at me as if I mattered, deserved better than that line recycled from every obituary in town. I stood apart from the cluster of black coats and polite nods. The scent of lilies hung heavy, masking the wet earth and the scent of grief. I watched the shovel bite into the frozen ground again and again, each strike sounding like a door closing. She had told me not to cry when the time came. "Don't let them see they broke you," she whispered in that hospital bed. Her hand was shaking as she reached for mine. "And don't let them define your name." Those were her last words to me. I held them like a secret I wasn't ready to share. When the service ended, people began filing toward their cars, muttering kind condolences they didn't mean. I waited until everyone left before walking back to the mansion. The driveway was lined with expensive cars, the kind that cost more than my entire college education. Each one gleamed under the sleet, perfectly polished, perfectly hollow. Inside the marble foyer, the warmth hit like a slap. The house smelled of lemon polish and money. My reflection warped in the gold-framed mirror. I looked like someone who had wandered in from the wrong movie. "Rowan!" Silas Hale's voice could strip paint off a wall. He stood by the staircase, his black suit immaculate, his eyes the color of cold stone. He didn't waste time pretending to grieve. "Where is it?" he asked. I frowned. "Where's what?" "The silver bracelet, the one your mother wore. It's gone." I blinked, not sure I heard right. "You think I—" Coulter stepped out from the sitting room, adjusting his tie like he'd been rehearsing this moment. "Come on, Dad. We all know he's had sticky fingers since he got here. You always took what wasn't yours, didn't you, Rowan? Even her love." The room went silent except for the faint tick of the grandfather clock. My pulse roared in my ears, but I kept my voice steady. "You're grieving. Maybe you misplaced it." Silas's lip curled. "Don't patronize me. Your mother pitied you. I don't." He took a step closer, his cologne sharp enough to burn. "You were a mistake, Rowan. You don't belong in this family, and you never did. Get out before I call the police." I didn't move right away. My eyes drifted to the family portrait hanging over the mantel. I was in that photo once, standing beside Eleanor, her hand on my shoulder. Now the frame showed a new version. My place had been filled by an empty stretch of wallpaper. "I didn't take anything," I said quietly. Silas didn't answer. He just turned away, already done with me. I walked to the door, every step echoing across the marble floor. Coulter's smirk followed me like a shadow. Outside, the sky had gone from gray to white, Snow thickening in the air. I had nothing but a duffel bag slung over my shoulder, a wallet, and my phone. Her last voicemail still saved. My fingers hovered over the play button, but I couldn't bring myself to hear her voice yet. I stood there for a moment, staring up at the mansion, all glass and stone and silence. The kind of house people envied from the outside, but never saw the rot beneath. Maybe silence isn't peace, I thought. Maybe it's a cage. The snow began to fall harder, coating the steps as I walked down the long driveway. My breath came out in clouds, fading fast into the fog. I didn't look back until I reached the gate. Her voice came to me again, not through the phone, not through memory, but inside my head. Don't let them define your name. I looked back once more at the mansion glowing faintly through the mist, like a lie that refused to die. One day, I murmured, they'll remember mine. I turned and kept walking, each step taking me farther from the boy they buried with her, and closer to the man I'd have to become. I didn't know it yet, but that night was the first time I stopped being their son and started becoming my own man. By the time I reached Route 17, the world had thinned into streaks of rain and neon. I hadn't planned where I'd end up that night. I just kept driving until the numbness settled deep enough to be quiet. A small red sign flickered ahead, half lit and tired. Motel Pines, vacancy. I pulled in. The rain had turned the parking lot into a shallow lake of reflections. Every step from the car to the front office felt like walking on broken memories. Inside, a woman behind the counter didn't even look up when I walked in, just slid a room key across the counter like I was invisible. Room 6, ice machine's broken. No breakfast. I nodded. No point pretending like either of us cared. The room smelled like bleach and old cigarettes. One lamp worked. The other buzzed when I touched it, so I left it alone. The bedspread was scratchy, floral, and older than I was. The kind of place where lost people went when they had nowhere else. I dropped the duffel on the carpet, sat at the edge of the bed, and stared at my reflection in the mirror above the dresser. The fluorescent light overhead flickered enough to make my face blur in and out. Who was I now? A man without a name. A son without a home. I turned on the faucet, let the water run cold, and scrubbed my hands until the skin went red. The sink began to fill, but I didn't stop it. Couldn't. It was like watching something fall apart and feeling relieved that at least something else was breaking too. Somewhere behind me, a static-filled gospel station whispered from the clock radio. I sat back down. My wrist itched, not from pain, but from absence. The bracelet, hers. I touched the spot without thinking, the skin pale where it had once rested. Her voice tried to return, like a wind pressing against a closed window. Don't let them define your name. But it was fainter now, less sure, like even she was beginning to doubt me. I closed my eyes and let the memory in, not to torture myself, but to feel something solid. Last year, Thanksgiving dinner. Silas was sipping wine, smug as always. Software developer, he'd said with that fake chuckle. Sounds like code for unemployed with a laptop. I remember my fork pausing midair. Eleanor hadn't even looked up. She just said, "He builds software, Silas. You build resentment." And just like that, the room fell silent. She was the only one who ever pulled the weight off my shoulders, the only one who stood between me and the erasure they were all too ready to deliver. And now she was gone. I lay back, fully clothed, listening to the rain claw at the windows. I pulled out my phone, 2% battery, one unread voicemail. It had arrived that morning. I hadn't noticed. It was scheduled to send 5 days after her death. I sat up fast. My thumb hesitated, then pressed play. Her voice came through, quiet, thin, but unmistakably hers. If they ever turn on you, go to the box. The truth's inside the blue envelope. The message ended. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then I lunged for the duffel, threw aside shirts, chargers, old receipts, until my hand brushed something rigid. A plain envelope tucked inside a cardboard jewelry box. Light blue, just like she said. I turned it over, sealed. My fingers trembled. She knew this would happen, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I knelt beside the bed, not to pray. I stopped praying when I was 12 and realized God didn't sit at our dinner table. I knelt for clarity. If silence was my cage, I whispered, this will be my way out. The envelope went into my jacket. I stood slowly, looked at the flickering ceiling light, and felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but something like breath after drowning. Outside, thunder rolled like it had something to say. I walked to the window, peeled the curtain back. The rain had let up a little, just enough to see the sheen of water over the lot. A car. Idling. Not parked in a spot. Just sitting there, facing room 6. I watched for a while. The engine didn't cut. No door opened. No headlights blinked. Someone was watching. I didn't sleep much after spotting the car outside. Something about the way it sat, engine humming, headlights dimmed, unmoving, told me it wasn't just some lost traveler checking into a room. I waited until nearly 4, watching through a crack in the curtain. When I finally stepped outside, the car was gone, leaving behind nothing but wet asphalt and suspicion. By sunrise, I was already back on the road, driving without a destination. The blue envelope was still in my jacket, its weight more psychological than physical. I hadn't opened it yet. Part of me was afraid. Another part knew that once I did, there'd be no turning back. The road took me through the back end of Hartford. The sky had settled into a dull gray, the kind that makes even clean streets look forgotten. I found a small coffee shop tucked between a pawn shop and a laundromat, Mara's Diner, the kind of place with flickering lights and chipped mugs. Inside, it smelled like burnt toast and overbrewed coffee. I ordered eggs and black coffee, sat by the window, and pulled the envelope out, setting it beside my plate like it belonged there. It's strange, I muttered under my breath, how fear sounds quiet until you realize it's the same sound as hope. I sipped the coffee. It tasted like ash. Over the counter, a muted television played a local morning show. The crawl at the bottom read, Hale Foundation Charity Gala this Saturday. Just beneath that, a stock image of the Hale Mansion appeared. And then, for barely a second, my face flashed in the corner. The word controversy hung beneath it like an accusation. That was all I needed. I peeled open the envelope with slow fingers. Inside were 2 things. 1. A legal document, stamped, signed, notarized, transferring partial founding rights of Hale Technologies to me. The date, 5 years ago. Eleanor's signature sat beside mine, in that same precise handwriting she used on birthday cards. Next to that, a letter, folded once. Rowan, if they ever erase your name, remember. It's printed in blue ink because truth doesn't fade. This company was as much your vision as theirs. You earned every line of that contract, whether they admit it or not. E.H. I read it 3 times. My hand drifted to my wrist again, a reflex now. They knew. Silas and Coulter had known this paper existed. And if they didn't, they must have sensed something. Why else would they throw me out under the flimsiest excuse imaginable? This wasn't grief. This was strategy. I finished my coffee and unfolded the letter again. At the bottom, in smaller handwriting, was a phone number and a name. Grace Ellison. I remembered the name. She was Eleanor's assistant for years, always around during holidays, always polite. I used to bring her tea when she worked late in the office. I didn't think. I just called. She answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was raspy, older, but clear. She hesitated when I introduced myself. "Rowan Hale," she said, voice tightening with memory. "That's me," I said. I have something Eleanor left me. Your number was in the letter." There was a pause. "She said you might come. I'm in a residence now, retired, but I can talk." The place wasn't far. A small assisted living complex on the edge of town, clean, quiet. I knocked on her door and waited. Grace opened the door herself. Her hair had gone fully white, and she moved slower than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp. She stepped aside and let me in without a word. Her apartment was warm, filled with the faint smell of lavender and old books. "She told me not to reach out," Grace said, easing into her recliner. "Said if you needed me, you'd come when the time was right." I handed her the document. She looked it over with a tight nod, like seeing an old truth finally breathe again. "She made me hide the original," Grace said. "Didn't trust Silas or Coulter. She said they'll destroy him if they ever see this before I'm gone." I sat across from her, stunned. She loved you, Rowan. Truly. But she knew what kind of men they were becoming. What they'd do to keep their grip on that company. Grace stood and walked slowly to a drawer near the kitchen. She returned holding a small flash drive. She also recorded something. For the foundation board. A message. Proof of everything. Your role. The contract. Her wishes. She wanted to send it when the time was right. But I think she knew she'd run out of time. I stared at the flash drive, hesitating only a second before taking it. "They didn't just throw me out," I whispered. "They deleted me." Grace's eyes softened. "Not for long." I left her home as clouds began to shift, letting streaks of pale light break through. The air was cold, but it wasn't the kind of cold that made you retreat. It made you move faster. As I stepped out onto the sidewalk, I saw it again. The same black car, idling, same model, same dent above the front wheel. They were still watching. I didn't flinch. "If they're watching me," I muttered, "it means they're scared." The flash drive in my pocket wasn't just proof. It was bait. 3 days passed. I didn't go back to the motel. I kept moving. Different coffee shops, borrowed Wi-Fi, libraries, back streets. The flash drive never left my jacket pocket. Neither did the envelope. I wasn't hiding. I was waiting for the storm inside me to settle into something usable. By Thursday morning, it did. The sun was barely up when I parked across from the Hale Technologies tower. The glass panels caught the light just enough to make the place look sacred. To some, maybe it was. To me, it was a vault of lies, built on half-truths and buried names. I hadn't worn a suit. Just a dark coat, clean jeans, and the calm of someone with nothing left to lose. I stood for a moment across the street, watching employees stream in, familiar faces pretending not to recognize me. That part hurt more than it should have. I knew their names, birthdays, even their kids' soccer schedules. Now I was just air. I crossed slowly. No rush, no fear. Just one step, then another. Inside, the lobby gleamed, sterile and expensive. Everything smelled of polish and entitlement. A few people looked up. One woman dropped her eyes immediately. Another nudged a colleague. They whispered. That's what ghosts do. They linger. They rattle. The man at the security desk didn't recognize me at first. Then he tilted his head. "Rowan Hale?" he said, half unsure. I pulled out my old access badge and handed it to him. He scanned it. The screen blinked green. "Still works." Welcome back, sir," he muttered. "Conference room is on 36, if you're looking for the board." I didn't answer. I just walked to the elevator and pressed the button. The climb was silent. 36 floors of quiet ascent, long enough for a man to lose his nerve. I didn't. When the doors opened, I stepped out and walked down the corridor lined with abstract art and fake plants. At the end, the boardroom. Thick glass doors. Frosted logo in the middle. Hale Technologies. The H wrapping around the T like a stranglehold. They were mid-meeting when I entered. Silas sat at the head of the table. Coulter lounged on the side like he always did, smirking like he was the smartest man in the room and too bored to prove it. The moment I stepped in, the air changed. Coulter's lips curled. "Didn't think you'd crawl back so soon." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I stepped forward, pulled the folded document from my coat, and laid it flat on the center of the table. Silas glanced at it, then did a double take. The blue ink on the top. Unmistakable. Hale Technologies. My name. Eleanor's signature. Silas's face paled just a shade. Coulter leaned in, squinting. "Cute trick. You really want us to believe Eleanor gave you co-founder status? Please." I stayed silent, watching them like a chess player holding his final move. Silas's voice grew sharper. "This is forgery. You're not entitled to anything. This company was built by blood." Met his stare, steady and cold. "You should be careful with your words. Some of them are recorded." And then I placed the flash drive on the table. I didn't say what was on it. I didn't have to. Coulter's smirk wavered. Silas didn't touch it. I turned and walked out. No yelling, no lawyers, no drama. Just silence. The kind that makes people sweat. As I stepped into the elevator, I could feel it. The storm I'd brought into their glass temple. By the time I reached the ground floor, I heard the shift in energy. Whispering, phones buzzing, doors closing just a bit too quickly. He's back. I walked through the lobby like I'd never left. Like the name they tried to erase had never faded. Outside, the cold morning air bit at my skin, but I didn't flinch. As I moved down the street, I passed a glass window. The Hale Technologies logo gleamed back at me in reverse. "Not anymore," I said to my reflection. Somewhere high above, behind a pane of boardroom glass, Silas had pulled Coulter into his office. I didn't need to be there to hear it, but I caught a fragment through the echo of hallway acoustics before the door clicked shut. "If that document's real," Silas hissed, "everything changes." Coulter's voice was lower but not uncertain. "Then we make sure it disappears. Again." I didn't stop walking. That night I was back at a rented room. A new one, different town. I left the lights off. The laptop screen glowed in front of me as I typed a message to a lawyer friend I hadn't spoken to in years. My phone buzzed. No name, just a video. Me walking out of the Hale Tower earlier that morning, captioned with one word, mistake. The word clung to the screen like a wound. Mistake. That single label, stamped over my image, did more damage than 1,000 curses ever could. I set the phone down face first and didn't touch it again for hours. 2 weeks later, I was living in a cramped apartment on the edge of Boston, the kind of place you pass without noticing. Peeling paint, weak plumbing, and neighbors who avoided eye contact. No furniture besides a borrowed mattress and a thrift store desk. The walls were thin enough to hear other people's lives moving forward. Mine wasn't. I woke to the buzz of another email notification. I didn't bother sitting up. I just pulled the laptop closer across the blanket, blinking against the screen's glow. Another rejection. This time from a job I'd applied for under my full legal name. The same name attached to the controversy from the Hale Foundation's press whisper. I laughed. Just once. Low, bitter, and hollow. Even my name was blacklisted. The coffee in the mug on the floor was 3 days old, cold as the apartment. I'd stopped drinking it halfway through a sleepless night. The air smelled like rain-soaked cardboard and regret. I let my arm dangle off the mattress, fingers brushing the hardwood, not reaching for anything. I was empty. The letter from Silas's legal team still sat on the desk. I hadn't touched it since the day it arrived. It wasn't just a cease and desist. It was a declaration, an attempt to finalize my erasure. Destroy all falsified documents within 24 hours, it read. Attached was a still photo. Me, walking out of Hale Technologies, captured in grainy security footage, captioned again, mistake. I wanted to rip it in half, burn it, scream, but I didn't. I just stared. And then I folded forward, head in my hands, elbows digging into my knees, the weight of it all finally collapsing in on me. I thought back to when Eleanor first brought me home. I was 8, scrawny, silent. Silas had shaken my hand like I was a junior business partner. That night at dinner, he smiled. Not wide, but enough that I noticed. The only time he ever did. I'd been chasing that smile for 26 years. I wanted them to love me so badly, I whispered, that I let them define me. For a long time, I sat there in the stillness, watching the light fade from the window. I didn't answer the landlord's knock. I didn't open the curtains. I just started folding clothes into my old duffel. There weren't many. Maybe peace isn't for people like me, I said out loud. And then something thudded to the floor. I glanced down. My jacket had slipped from the bed frame and tucked inside, forgotten until now. The motel envelope Eleanor had left me. I'd read the note, replayed the voicemail, but I hadn't checked it since that night. I opened it again, and there, behind the first note, a second sheet, folded tighter, thinner, like it wasn't meant to be found. Unless you were desperate enough to look twice. It read, "If they take everything, it's because they're afraid you'll build something without them." Her handwriting, delicate but firm. The ink was starting to fade. For a while, I didn't move. Then, slowly, I sat back down and held the paper between my fingers like it might crumble. They weren't afraid of me because I was weak. They were afraid of what I might become if I wasn't under their control. I opened my laptop again, not to check email this time, but to replay Grace's last voicemail. "She trusted you for a reason," Grace had said. "You just have to remember why." I stood, crossed to the window, and looked out. Boston was a blur of street lamps and brake lights, all moving on without me. But somewhere in that chaos, something flickered. Not just light, but maybe a way forward. "They took my name once," I said. "I'll make them pay to use it again." I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the desk, hands on the keyboard, and searched for something that still belonged to me. By sunrise, I found it. A domain name I used years ago in college. Forgotten by everyone but me. It was still available. I bought it. And in that moment, just a click, just a blink, The first seed of my own empire was planted. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like the storm had shifted, but not yet passed. 3 months later, I was still in that stillness. But it was the kind that comes before a wave lifts, not drowning, not yet swimming, just movement beneath the surface. The co-working loft was a second-floor walk-up in South Boston. Creaky floors, drafty windows, a smell of old wood and burnt espresso lingering in the walls. The kind of place where ideas got born quietly, far from boardrooms and press releases. It was after midnight when I finally paused, hands stiff from coding, shoulders hunched from hours of leaning in. The laptop screen cast a faint blue over the room. Not cold, not warm. Just enough to remind me that something was growing. They took my inheritance, I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck. So I built something they couldn't touch, an idea. The platform was called Blue Thread, a digital ecosystem built around secure collaboration, privacy-first communications, and traceable authorship. Nothing flashy. But every line of code carried something they couldn't own. Truth. I embedded Eleanor's words into the footer, invisible to the user, but there for me. Truth doesn't fade. One night, as the radiator hissed and a storm rolled through the streets outside, someone knocked on the glass-paneled door. Not the landlord this time. Not another late-night delivery. "Rowan Hale?" the man asked, stepping into the light. I blinked hard. He was older, maybe mid-60s. Trim beard, sharp wool coat. The kind of presence that didn't apologize for showing up unannounced. "Elijah Marks," he said, offering his hand. "I knew your mother. I was once one of her investors." I stared, unsure if this was another trap. "She used to talk about you," he said, scanning the modest space. "Said you had your father's quiet. And her fire." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He didn't offer pity. He offered partnership. "You're not the only one watching what Hale Technologies is doing," Elijah said, sitting beside the desk like he belonged there. "There are people who remember who really built that company. Some of us are waiting for someone to challenge the version of history they've sold." I didn't speak for a while, just stared at the cursor blinking on the screen. "I'm not using the Hale name," I finally said. "It doesn't belong to me anymore." He nodded. "So what are you using?" I typed it into the contract he laid before me. Rowan Mercer. My mother's maiden name. We signed before the kettle finished boiling. The next few weeks blurred, not in chaos, but in motion. Each day had purpose. Each night, I added something new to the platform. A login feature here, an encrypted ledger there. My inbox began to fill. First with small-time coders asking questions, then with angel investors intrigued by whispers of a ghost founder building, something elegant, efficient, and entirely out of reach from Silicon Valley's spotlight. I didn't need to be remembered. I needed to be undeniable. And I was getting close. One Tuesday afternoon, I refreshed the patent office records, a habit I picked up since filing Blue Thread's architecture under my new legal identity. That's when I saw it. Hale Technologies, patent filing, secure collaborative cloud protocol, pending. They tried to take it, my code, my vision, my work. But I had anticipated this. Months ago, I had filed under sealed terms with legal timestamps, digital proof, immutable records, registered 3 weeks before theirs. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't post online. I just waited. The fallout came quietly. A colleague from the inside messaged me anonymously. "Silas lost it in the boardroom. Said your name like it was a ghost that wouldn't die." Coulter, I heard, wanted to fight it publicly. But Silas, cold, Calculating Silas knew better. Fighting meant acknowledging I existed. That night, I walked home beneath a steady rain. No umbrella, no rush, just peace. At the corner of Broadway and Dorchester, I stopped beneath a flickering streetlight, closed my eyes, let the drops hit my face, and whispered into the wet air, "Truth doesn't fade." It wasn't a declaration. It was armor. Back in the loft, I shut down the laptop gently. The screen dimmed, but the blue light stayed with me, glowing faintly on the window's glass, like a fire just starting to breathe. And in the silence, I could feel it. The hum of power starting to echo outward. But power always echoes. And the louder I built, the more they started to listen. Not long after, I got the message. No subject line, just 5 words. Dinner, just the 2 of us. The sender was Coulter. I stared at it longer than I should have. It was the kind of invitation that didn't come without reason. After years of silence, betrayal, and smear campaigns, my brother suddenly wanted to sit across a table. No lawyers, no audience. I replied with 2 words. Sure, just the 2 of us. The rooftop restaurant was exactly the kind of place Coulter liked to be seen in. Polished marble, hovering waitstaff, and a wine list longer than some novels. Boston Harbor stretched out in the background like a curated painting, all lights and reflections. He was already there when I arrived, arms open like nothing had ever happened. "Rowan," he beamed, pulling me into a hug that felt more like being measured. "Man, look at you. You've filled out. And blue thread. Impressive." I let him talk. Coulter had always known how to own a room. He could make a threat sound like a compliment, a lie sound like scripture. Tonight, he was in full charm mode, pouring the wine, ordering the food before I even sat down. "You know," he said as the appetizers were laid out, "Mom would have been proud. She always said you had a stubborn streak. Must have gotten that from her." I didn't touch the wine. He noticed. "I'm good with water," I said calmly. "Still so pure," he smirked, sipping his glass. "But really, I mean it. You've done well. Built something out of nothing. That takes guts." I watched him, his smile, his tone, the flicker of something behind his eyes. He was performing. He always was. But something in his left hand, a tiny tremor as he adjusted his watch, told me this wasn't just a family reunion. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a man standing near the bar, black suit, drink untouched, watching us, pretending not to. The waiter cleared our plates. Another pour of wine for Coulter. I declined again. Then his tone shifted, just slightly. "You know," he began, leaning back, "it's not too late to come back. Dad's been reflective. He's willing to forgive. There might even be a place for you again." I set my fork down, slowly. "Forgive?" I asked, tilting my head. "You called me a thief at our mother's funeral." He waved a hand, chuckling softly like I was bringing up something silly. "Business gets messy, Rowan. You know that. Emotions run high. You shouldn't take things so personally." I stared at him, unblinking. "How convenient," I said. "All those years of silence, the press releases, the lawsuits, and now that Blue Thread is growing legs, suddenly I'm family again." "That's not what this is," he said, voice smooth. "We just miss you." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed under the table. A message preview from Elijah. "They're recording you. Don't sign anything." I didn't react outwardly, just adjusted my posture, lowered my gaze slightly. Then I noticed it, the slight glow from Coulter's briefcase resting just beneath his chair. A red recording light, barely visible unless you knew where to look. So that was the play. This dinner wasn't about reconciliation. It was bait. A chance to get me saying something they could twist, edit, weaponize. A setup wrapped in steak tartare and vintage Bordeaux. I leaned in, lowering my voice to match his fake sincerity. "You really thought I'd come here without my own recording?" I asked. Coulter froze. I placed my phone on the table, screen facing him. It had been live streaming to a private server the entire time. His face shifted, just slightly. The cracks in his performance beginning to show. I kept going. "You invited me here to paint a picture. The lost son returning, humbled, grateful. Maybe even signing something under the candlelight." Coulter said nothing. He just clenched his jaw. "You spent years trying to define me," I said softly. "Tonight, you defined yourself." I stood up. Behind me, I heard his voice crack like glass. "You'll regret this, Rowan." I didn't turn. "Not this time," I said, and walked away without looking back. That night, I uploaded the full recording. No edits, no commentary, just the raw truth, start to finish. Coulter's voice, his rehearsed empathy, the exposed recorder under the table. And I watched. I watched the mask begin to slip, not just from Coulter, but from the entire Hale legacy. And I knew this wasn't the end. It was the breach before the flood. 2 days later, the flood came. I woke to Elijah pounding on my apartment door. It wasn't even 7. "Turn on the news," he said, breathless, shoving his phone into my hand. The screen flashed bold headlines. Breaking. Hale Technologies accuses Blue Thread of corporate theft. Lawsuit filed this morning. There it was. The play I'd expected, just not this fast or this public. I stared at the images flashing across every major financial network. My photo beside Silas's, my mother's name used like a club. The headline read like a verdict. "Illegitimate son exploits mother's legacy." "They're trying to burn you alive," Elijah muttered, pacing the floor. I stood still, my voice calm. "Then I'll show them what truth looks like when it burns back." By noon, I was walking through the front doors of Hale Technologies. Again, the same sterile coldness wrapped around me, marble floors, brushed steel, and whispers that followed me like smoke. People stared. This time, no one looked away. I didn't stop until I reached the same conference room, the one from months ago, where Silas had once dared to question my existence. He was there, waiting. Coulter sat beside him, looking pale. A team of lawyers flanked them like vultures in tailored suits. Coulter didn't smile this time. "You wanted attention, brother?" he sneered. "Now you've got it." I walked to the center of the room. My fingers didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. "This isn't about me anymore," I said, placing a small USB drive on the polished table. "It's about what she left behind." They exchanged glances, annoyed, unimpressed, until the screen flickered on. A video began to play, grainy at first, then sharpening into Eleanor's face. Her voice was calm, composed. Her eyes never wavered from the lens. "To the Hale board. If anything happens to my son Rowan, know that I left him my half of the company, my vote, my voice, my name. This is my final directive." The room fell into absolute silence. Silas stiffened, but it was Coulter who flinched, eyes darting toward the projector controls, fumbling like he could still erase her. Too late. I stepped closer. "You erased me from your company," I said, eyes locked on Silas. "But she made sure I could rebuild it without you." One of the board members stood, slowly, and began filming with her phone. Another leaned over to whisper something to the man next to her. It spread, like smoke curling under a door. One of Silas's lawyers muttered, "We need to review this." Coulter was red now, panic unraveling his composure. "This is fake. It could be edited." "It's not," Elijah said, stepping forward. "We have the original file, signed, time-stamped, and notarized, courtesy of Grace Ellison." Silas's eyes narrowed at Elijah. He didn't speak, just clenched his jaw like it might hold back the tide. But it was already too late. By evening, the video had gone viral. News anchors debated its authenticity, but the public didn't care. They saw a mother speaking from beyond the grave to protect her son. And they listened. Eleanor knew trended within an hour. Hale Technologies' stock tumbled. 20 points in one day. Investors started pulling out. Coulter tried damage control, issuing a statement of regret. Then the dinner recording leaked. His entire mask shattered in the court of public opinion. Every word, every lie, played on repeat, stitched together with Eleanor's final message. One network called it the corporate takedown of the decade. Elijah called me late that night. "You didn't just win, Rowan," he said. "You rewrote the story." I stared out the window, Boston glowing below like a field of dying embers. "No," I said quietly. "I just told it in my own voice." Before dawn, I took the train out to the cemetery. There were no cameras, no headlines, just me. The grass was wet. The wind smelled like rain. I knelt beside her grave, still marked only with her name and a date, and placed a pen beside it, one with blue ink. "You were right, Mom," I whispered. "Truth doesn't fade." The breeze shifted, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. That night, as I stepped back into my apartment, I saw the envelope on the floor. Cream cardstock, gold trim. The Hale Foundation requests your presence, their annual charity gala. The same one they uninvited me from. 5 months to the day. I didn't plan to go. Until I realized some ghosts deserve a standing ovation. And so, 5 months to the day after they buried her and exiled me, I returned. Not with fury, not with fire, but with a silence louder than any of them had ever dared speak. The private jet touched down just before sunset, skimming across the Boston skyline like a quiet exhale. Floodlights lit the runway, and cameras crowded the velvet-lined barricades near the museum's south wing. The red carpet shimmered beneath them, a glimmering stage waiting for its final act. As the door opened, I stepped out into the fall air, crisp and unsparing. The moment my shoes hit the ground, a ripple moved through the crowd. I wasn't alone. The president was by my side. We shook hands before the lenses. He leaned in with a warm half-smile and whispered, "This moment's bigger than politics, son. Your mother earned this." I nodded, saying nothing. The cameras captured the exchange, but I wasn't performing for them. Reporters called out, eager for a quote. "Mr. Hale, is it true you're making the foundation's biggest donation tonight?" I looked toward the museum steps, gleaming in soft gold lighting, and smiled. Let's just say, the future is blue. The pen in my breast pocket pressed lightly against my chest. Inside, the gala was already in motion. Champagne flutes clinked. Soft jazz played from a string quartet nestled beneath a massive oil painting of some forgotten aristocrat. The air was thick with pretense, a cocktail of wealth, curated guilt, and tax write-offs. Silas stood at the podium, flanked by aides. Coulter, not far off, sipped something brown and expensive, trying too hard to seem unaffected. And so, Silas said into the microphone, voice rehearsed. "We welcome each of you, and we remain humbled by your generosity." The glass doors swung open. I walked in. Silence. All conversation drained out like air from a punctured balloon. Eyes turned. Forks froze midair. I didn't break stride. The president entered just behind me, and instinctively, the crowd parted. My footsteps echoed against marble floors as I approached the stage. Silas's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Rowan, son," I held up a hand. "Please, continue." His voice faltered, the mic picking up the stammer. Coulter shot me a smile too tight to be real. "Didn't expect you to make it tonight." I looked him over once, then turned back toward the crowd. The presenter approached with a velvet tray. On it, an envelope. Deep navy blue, sealed with gold wax. I opened it and removed the check. No flourish, no announcement. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out the old pen, the one she'd used, the one she'd left behind, and signed, Rowan Mercer Hale. Gasps spread like wildfire. The signature lit up on the projection screen behind us. The cameras flashed. Phones were lifted. "This," I said clearly, "covers every scholarship, every health initiative, every woman-led tech incubator my mother dreamed of funding before her death. The ones you shelved after the boardroom door closed." I looked directly at Silas. "Her name will live longer than your silence." His mouth opened. "We never meant to—" "You meant every word," I cut in. "So now, live with them." He said nothing more. The fallout was immediate. Within minutes, reporters began circling. A leaked audit had just surfaced. Misuse of foundation funds, slush account transfers, six-figure consulting fees to a non-existent advisory firm run by Coulter's college roommate. The room buzzed with whispers and thinly veiled panic. One reporter, a woman in a deep green dress, turned toward Coulter as he tried to pose with a smile beside the art installation. "How does it feel?" she asked, voice sharp as glass, "knowing your brother just saved the family name?" His grin twitched. For a second, I thought he'd say something vile, but instead, he turned away, jaw clenched so tightly I could hear the grinding. The president clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," he said. I didn't respond. My eyes were fixed on the pen in my hand, the ink still drying on my name. Her name. Our name. I didn't stay for the speeches. I slipped out onto the museum's grand steps, the buzz of cameras fading behind me. The wind carried the scent of Boston's harbor. Streetlights flickered below like distant memories. A car pulled up. Elijah stepped out, his coat half-buttoned. "You're not going to stick around for the applause?" he asked. I shook my head. I didn't come for applause. He stood beside me, watching the night like it owed him something. "You did it." "No," I said, quiet. "I just finished her sentence." We didn't speak again for a while. Before he drove off, I slid the blue pen back into my pocket. The weight of it, small but final, settled over me like peace. Behind me, the gala blazed on, but it no longer had anything left to say. And from somewhere deep in memory, I heard her voice again. Not from a recording this time, but from within. "Truth doesn't fade, my son. It writes its way home." That night, they played their final game under golden chandeliers and hollow speeches. They once threw me out of their mansion. Now they'll live forever in the shadow of my mother's name. And I'll live free of theirs.